Good morning, welcome to this Accountability and Performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Shepherds, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire, joined by Andy Profit, Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Constabulary. Welcome to members of the public watching this meeting. This meeting is designed to help me fulfil my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the work of the Constabulary. It is webcast to the public for transparency. It is on view-only mode, so there's no ability for the public to ask questions, but I hope you find the meeting useful and informative. We've got 4 items on today's agenda. We're going to be covering police custody, burglary winter plans, roads policing and road safety, and hate crime. We'll cover them in that order. So we'll start with police custody. Chief Constable, perhaps can I just start really in view of sort of well-publicised cases in the Metropolitan Police. What's your assessment, and are you satisfied with how Hertfordshire's custody suites operate from a culture and conduct and professional standards perspective?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. The recent Panorama programme had some horrible footage, didn't it, of some of the most awful behaviour from officers and staff, I think, in the Metropolitan Police. I think, like viewers will be, I was horrified to see that there's no place for that in policing. I do not see that in the custody suites at Hertfordshire. 2 custody suites, of course, one at Stevenage, one at Hatfield. That said, I'm not complacent, but I do have a high level of confidence that we don't see those sorts of behaviours. The reason I draw some confidence around that is the visible leadership. I know that happens in custody. We've got a dedicated chief inspector, a superintendent, senior officers who spend their time in those 2 suites, listening to, speaking to, observing and making sure the behaviours are right. We've got a really proactive and rigorous approach to dealing with public complaints. So when people who come into custody or through custody raise concerns with us, we look at that rigorously. I know your office supports with that, so we understand themes and patterns around detention, search and civility. We have independent scrutiny of our custody suites with unannounced non-police people coming into custody, talking to detainees, giving us feedback on what they are told by the people in custody. We work with our Race Inclusion Board in Hertfordshire. We use CCTV in custody, and we plan to use that even more proactively going forward. So the senior team will dip sample random sections of footage. So all in all, I'm not complacent, but I do not see and believe that type of behaviour exists in Hertfordshire, I'm pleased to say.
Thank you, and I know you've made clear your approach to that internally as well, which is welcome. Thank you, and we discussed the report of the independent custody visitors at the previous APM, which was broadly positive in terms of what those independent visitors had observed and the conversations they'd had with people in custody. Fairly recently, the Constabulary introduced some new observation doors into custody suites to improve safety. Can you tell me a bit more about how that's worked and the initial assessment of the impact of those?
Yeah, so you're right, Commissioner. In May this year, 2025, 4 of our cells had effectively big metal doors, as you need for detaining prisoners, but they've got windows in them, so you can see through those. The reason for that being is twofold. Number one, it's a nicer environment for someone to be securely detained if they are a juvenile or they're vulnerable, maybe suffering from mental health or some kind of ailment, for example. And also officers and staff can keep visual observations on an individual through that window to keep them safe. Although we haven't conducted a formal appraisal of the installation of those 4 doors, the early feedback is really positive in terms of it has led to a reduction in constant observation requirements. So the need to put an officer looking after a person in a cell with the door open because of the concerns about their behaviour, because it can be done through a closed door. So it's driven some efficiency in terms of how we're looking after people, and it has also reduced the amount of work we need to do with officers, an increasing amount of work we can do with our civilian detention officers, another really important part of the custody team. So we believe it's making us efficient and effective. We believe it's the right thing for vulnerable and juveniles coming into custody. We will do a formal assessment, but the early view is they have been a really successful addition.
That's good to hear. Thank you. And that role of ensuring safety in custody is really critical, isn't it, in terms of both detainees but also police officers and staff working there. Kind of more broadly, how does the constabulary monitor safety in custody, and in terms of quantifying that, how many assaults on police staff and officers have been in custody recently?
Thank you. A really important area of business. There's about 1,000 people a month come into our custody suites across Hertfordshire. One of the very first things that happen is that the custody sergeant, the person responsible for looking after that person, and that's set down in law, that's their statutory obligation. They decide whether the person should be detained, are their grounds lawful, and they conduct an extensive risk assessment to make sure we understand how to keep that person safe in custody. So that's the primary measure of how we assess risk. As I've already said, there's CCTV in cells and in custody suites. We have medical professionals in our custodies to look after detainees. We do get clearly people coming into custody who are violent, maybe not happy about being there, or maybe unwell, drugs, alcohol, or mental health, and therefore we do get a relatively high amount of assaults in the custody environment. If you take the last 12 months, we've recorded 87 assaults on officers and staff. Every single individual who is assaulted gets bespoke support from their supervisor, medical attention if required, support from occupational health internal to the organisation if required, as well as wellbeing and other support like the chaplaincy team. So we understand it really closely. We monitor the patterns and trends to try and keep our officers and staff safe. And clearly there's a whole training regime around how individuals, custody sergeants, officers and staff are developed, supported and given the kit and equipment to keep them as safe as possible.
Thank you. And completely unacceptable in terms of that number of assaults on officers and staff who have an absolute right to do their job without being assaulted at work. And I know from what you said and elsewhere, a lot of work done to protect the well-being and safety of officers in custody and beyond, but quite stark those figures. I want to talk about detainees. There will clearly be times when children and young people are arrested for criminal offences and end up in custody. There'll also be some challenges around that as well. How does the constabulary monitor the use of custody for children?
In simple terms, we very, very closely, because it's really important that we only have children in a police custody environment where it's absolutely necessary. So that initial assessment by the custody sergeant, that's one of the key things they consider. And I'm reassured that is working, because between, over the last 12 months, 51 occasions, the custody sergeant has said, no, there is no need for this child to come into the custody environment. And each of those cases are reviewed for learning. And in all of those cases, bar two, that retrospective review reinforced that sergeant's decision. It's not right to bring a child into custody. We proactively look at every single occasion where a child does come into custody, because clearly it will be necessary on certain occasions. And we've had particular focus where a child is kept in overnight. So I can tell you that, again, over the last 6 months, 190 occasions we've had a child in custody overnight. So about 30 a month, about one a day. The maths works out quite relevant there. Each and every one of those cases, there's a specific care plan wrapped around that child. We work closely with the medical health professional in custody to make sure that child has the support of that medical person as required. Every child has a statutory right and is provided with what we call an appropriate adult, their parent, their guardian, someone in a position of responsibility to look after their well-being. So, and we work really closely with the county council, who have a statutory obligation wherever possible and secure accommodation is needed post-custody to provide that accommodation. So a huge amount of attention, Commissioner, goes into, number one, making sure only children who should be in custody are, and when they do need to come in, they're really, really well looked after.
Thank you. And there'll clearly be occasions where that kind of overnight stay is unavoidable, if the arrest happened later in the day. But what is done to monitor the kind of length of detention and to ensure that children in custody are kind of put through the process and a decision made about whether they're being sent to court or released is made in kind of in as timely manner as possible?
So that process happens during that detention for each and every case. And we step back at the end of the week and the month and look at the learning across all those cases to make sure that we aren't keeping children in custody for longer than they should be. And I'm looking through my copious notes here. I can tell you that the average length of time in hours that a child is detained in custody in Hertfordshire is about 6 hours less than when an adult is detained. I can't find the exact figures in my brief, but we are really, really clear, and I'm really clear. Children should only be in custody where there's an absolute need for them to be there. Sadly, we know on occasions that there is a need to bring juveniles into custody because, for whatever reason, they're involved in crime of some significance.
Thank you. On some occasions, there'll be a need to use what's called anti-rip clothing in custody, where a detainee might pose some risks. Can you talk me through how that is used, how often it's used, and how the constabulary monitors its use?
Yeah, so anti-rip clothing could also be described and has been described as effectively a self-harm suit. So an individual comes into custody who there may be a concern around their well-being, so we put, or you can put that individual into clothing that they can't rip up, can't make ligatures from, and therefore can't harm themselves. In 2023, the constabulary used anti-rip clothing on 22 occasions. We were inspected by HMIC around that time, and HMIC were concerned that the constabulary was overusing that clothing, because obviously it's quite intrusive to take someone's clothes off them by definition and put them in effectively a police issued suit. But we reviewed our approach to that really carefully. We agreed with the assessment of HMIC, remembering it's always about keeping people safe. And in 2024, anti-rip clothing was used 5 times, and so far in 2025 it's been used 7 times. And it continues to be an area of really sharp focus for my custody leadership team to make sure that we're not overusing that necessary but clearly impacting tactic.
Thank you. And it's useful to see the kind of response to the inspection recommendations. There's always a risk in response to those kind of recommendations of overcompensating. Are you satisfied that hasn't happened and that those kind of figures in the sort of 5, 7 type benchmark is broadly where it should be, or is there a risk that there's now too much caution?
I trust my team's judgment on this, and that risk you pose is absolutely at the forefront of their mind. Do the right thing to look after that person, irrespective of the outcome. But I think the broad direction of we needed to use anti-rip clothing less was right, and I base that on the evidence of we are not seeing, and there's always this risk, but we're not seeing people come to harm as a result of less use of the anti-rip clothing.
That's the key measure, isn't it? Thank you. That's reassuring to have the update on. Thank you. I'm going to move on now to our next agenda item, which is burglary winter plans. It's the time of year where we typically would see burglaries beginning to tick up with darker nights, and people being out over the festive season as well at events and things. Can you talk me through the work the constabulary is doing and the plans in place to address burglary through the winter months, and how officers will be picking up and responding to any emerging hotspots?
Yes, I can, Commissioner. We have a really clear plan to tackle the burglary of people's homes and buildings connected to people's homes through the winter. The activity starts in full flow on the 19th of November, and that is led by a senior dedicated detective. We will have activity that is multifaceted, from understanding where hotspots or high-risk areas are, and our visible neighbourhood teams will be in there. We'll be working with our partners, working with Neighbourhood Watch, working with community groups to make sure that they are as well-defended areas as possible. Street lighting is on where appropriate, hedges are down, and community awareness is up. We are also using proactive and covert policing tactics. to patrol those areas, to prioritise known offenders, and to prioritise known organised criminal groups who target burglary. We will be using technology like ANPR and other technologies to target criminals using the road networks. A lot of burglaries happen with criminals using cars. We'll be working proactively with other forces, British Transport Police, to, as much as we can, crack down on the awful crime of people's homes being broken into. It will be a really, really comprehensive plan.
Thank you. I know residents will be reassured to hear that focus. Thinking at the moment around current activity and performance on residential burglary, how is the constabulary doing in terms of the things like attendance rates, recorded crime, positive outcomes on burglary?
Not as well as I'd like, I think, is the candid answer here. So we, as you rightly say, firstly we look at attendance rate, how many burglaries do we go to, and taking an average of the number of reports we attend between April and September, it's just short of 92% of burglaries reported at people's homes that we go to. I think there is always an exception. I'd like that to be a little closer to 100% because it's such an impacted crime. Sometimes there'll be occasions where it might not be appropriate, but not many. But we watch that, and my control room team here are really alive to the fact that when people's houses are broken into, the police should be turning up, and pretty damn quickly. In terms of the number of burglaries, we have seen an increase this year. In the 12 months to the end of October just gone, there were 3,051 offences of burglary. That's up by 261 offences from the same 12 months the previous year. Every single one of those is one too many. Breaking that down a little bit more, 1,940 were burglaries of people's houses, the worst type of burglary in my view, without in any way belittling the other 1,100 burglaries which were of not connected garages and sheds. So 1,940 occasions where people's homes were broken into. That bit is up by 2.6%. We understand hotspots. There are a number of towns across the county where the levels of burglary are slightly higher, but we do not have one or two glaring hotspots across the county. We need to be covering a range of towns and residential areas. So we've got a challenge to bring that level back down. It's going up, and that's got to be the wrong direction. So that's a clear focus for us. And we're not solving enough, Commissioner, as well. In the 12 months, again, to the end of October, we solved 5.4% of the burglaries of people's homes. That's the key measure for me. Burglaries of people's homes, we ought to be solving as many of these as we can, and I've set my organisation the clear goal. These aren't always easy things to solve. You don't always get brilliant forensic evidence, fingerprints or DNA, but we must and will work as hard as we can to do that. That will be through things like making sure we get there, making sure we have a really thorough forensic recovery program, so we get specialists there looking for fingerprints and DNA, making sure that we're working really hard across county lines and with other organisations to target prolific organised gangs, and where we do catch individuals, making sure that our relentless pursuit of the evidence of those individuals, using every single opportunity we've got, is as strong as it can be. We've got some great teams in this place with lots of capability. We can do better.
No, thank you for that. And it is burglary is relatively low in Hertfordshire, obviously it's ticking up a little bit, as you said, but it is a really invasive crime that really strikes at the right of people to be safe in their own home. And I think probably something we'll want to keep a really close eye on over the winter to look at how that develops and how some of the work that you've described impacts on that. How does the constabulary work to identify and disrupt those more kind of organised burglary conspiracies that both operate within the county and across county boundaries?
Yeah, and this is a really important area. And as you know, Commissioner, prior to becoming the chief of the best force in the country, I worked at the second best force in Essex, and the profile of burglary there was slightly different to Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire is a relatively affluent county and attracts a lot of organised cross-border criminality in this space, and perhaps proportionately has a little bit less of the opportunist type burglar. So that the constabulary has got some really capable teams in this place, a specialist investigation team who really think about and are expert at chasing the conspiracy, the organised planning and delivery of burglaries. So that's an important part of our tactic, and we have a really significant capability around what we call our mobile support team. And I don't want to go too much into the tactics, but they're a road-based policing team that can catch organised burglars moving around the county, and that is their focus. As I say, we've also got a really, really clear mandated kind of programme of forensic reviews to make sure we recover evidence from burglaries, a really, really clear intelligence capture requirement, a really, really proactive way we work with other forces to track and monitor individuals or groups we think are committing these offences. I can tell you right now there are ongoing and active investigations into a series of burglaries. I can't go into too much detail for reasons you understand, but there is live work happening in relation to that. And where we do catch people and we do convict people, which does happen, we're really proactive at using POCA powers, the powers that we have to take money and assets on criminals, and using proactive orders to control the behaviour of offenders having been convicted when they are sadly but necessarily released from incarceration. So it's a very thorough approach.
Thank you very much. That's helpful, and look forward to seeing how that pans out over the winter months, because it is an area that comes up regularly from the public in Hertfordshire. I'm going to move on to our next agenda item, which is road policing and road safety, which is very timely because I was at a residents' meeting in Rapid last night, and it was a big topic that got raised by residents. Obviously, roads policing done in collaboration with Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire, alongside Hertfordshire, and be useful to, perhaps for the benefit of members of the public watching, just kind of describe, if you could, how that works in collaboration with our two neighbouring forces, and how the roads policing unit kind of shares its time across the different counties.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner. So Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire and Cambridge have a long-standing collaboration of a decade or more around specialist policing capability, one of which is roads policing. Broadly speaking, the amount of resource, money, people, kit and equipment that goes into that is dictated by the size of the force. So Hertfordshire puts 44% of the resourcing into roads policing. We have a dedicated roads policing base in Hertfordshire at Stevenage, and we deploy 24 hours a day, 3 roads policing cars or more around the county. But it is collaborative, which gives us the opportunity to move around. If a particular issue happened in Hertfordshire and we need to bring more cars in, we can bring them in for Beds and Cabs, and vice versa.
Thank you. And in terms of that share of resourcing, literally one of the questions that came up last night, actually, does Hertfordshire get a fair share of activity broadly?
The short answer is not always. As with these things, there is ebb and flow of resource, and part of being a collaboration is sometimes you'll be at times of plenty and need to draw, and sometimes others will need to draw from you. But when you look over time, Hertfordshire tends to get slightly less than the 44% of resource that it puts into here, and Cambridge tends to draw slightly more than its proportion. And there are some reasons around that. One of those is it's a little bit technical, but the A14 is not a motorway, therefore doesn't have a highways agency cover, because it's such a key road, tends to draw a lot of our roads policing resource that way. Cambridge is also quite a rural county. What I can assure you, Commissioner, is this is in full line of sight of me, my fellow chief constables in the three forces, and our leaders in roads policing, and we are actively saying there's an important capability we want to keep in terms of economy of scale, but an equity that we must find in terms of a balance between what goes in and what goes out. So we've got a really capable roads policing team doing some great work. I think I'm actively working on making sure Hertfordshire get its bang for its buck.
Fantastic, thank you for that. On the occasions I've been out and seen some of the work the roads policing unit does, I've been really impressed with their work and the commitment to what they do. What's your assessment of the overall performance of road policing activity in Hertfordshire in terms of some of the kind of key metrics that you and other chief constables will be monitoring?
So I look at a range of metrics. Obviously, first and foremost, we look at fatalities on the road, and every single one of those is a tragedy for a family and families somewhere. And then killed and serious injury accidents. This year, we're seeing a slight increase nationally, and we're seeing that in Hertfordshire and indeed across Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire. So far, very sadly this year, since the 1st of January, there have been 27 road deaths on the roads of Hertfordshire, and if that continues at that trend, that will be sadly 36 lives lost by the end of December compared to 30 last year. So that as a key focus, that has to be the primary objective of our roads policing team, to keep people safe on the roads. The teams are really, really well sighted on where those accident hotspots are. In Hertfordshire, it tends to be A roads, not the motorway network and not the country lanes, so that's where the teams are focused. Of course, they do other fantastic work. They help us, fight crime, keep criminals off the road. So in the last 6 months, the team have made 420 arrests. They've conducted 160 stop and searches, and they've been involved in nearly 1,500 road policing enforcement around kind of road legislation. So they are a really proactive team, well linked in. As the Chief Inspector of Roads will tell you, I always like them to produce a little bit more for me. We have a monthly performance report comes in that we look at, and we understand what that spread and what that activity looks like.
Thank you. That's useful. In terms of some of that road safety activity that you alluded to, number of people killed and seriously injured in Hertfordshire's roads broadly flat over quite a long period of time. Actually, a sort of 10-year period hasn't significantly changed, and there's kind of a lot of national understanding around the kind of drivers of that, so-called fatal five, around careless driving, drink and drug driving, seatbelts, mobile phones, speeding. How does the roads policing unit kind of focus education and enforcement activity around those kind of five drivers of collisions and serious injuries?
Thank you. It's such an important area. Prevention here has to be the right way forward. The roads policing unit does activity in its own right, which I'll tell you about in a minute, but is also part of the wider Herts Road Safety Partnership, because it's not just my teams who keep the road safe. There's a county council highways planning imperative here, getting the speed limits right, making sure that trees and road furniture aren't the cause of deaths on bends, which usually it's the car or the bike coming off the road hitting something off the road that causes the death or serious injury. So there's this whole kind of design piece within there, and importantly around education of young people and bike riders as two high-risk groups, young and inexperienced drivers and bike riders. So work goes on, working with schools, working with colleges, working through the partnership to get the road design right. There are campaigns through the year. So in the summer months, we run a bike safe campaign. Officers will go out on bikes, they'll talk to cycling groups, because sadly we know that motorcyclists, either through their own actions or others, can be vulnerable on the road. We've got a very specific piece of activity, Operation Apex, that's looking at educating young people and young drivers between 16 and 21 as a higher risk group. And another piece of activity, again with another operational name, because policing loves putting name on things, Operation Topaz, which is about tackling harm in and around towns and communities through our road policing resource. So we're looking at violence against women and girls, and making sure that taxi drivers are educated and supported in terms of how they can keep women and girls safe, and dealing with other kind of road-based vulnerabilities that happen. So there's a really thorough approach. I think there's more we can do in partnership with the Herts Safety Road Partnership to really drive that preventative work forward. I don't think it's perfect. I think it's a good start. I think there's more we can do in that space, and certainly something we'll be looking at over the next 3 or 4 months.
Thank you, and there's certainly work being done across the partnership on a new road safety strategy that I think will be an opportunity to do some of that work. So I agree there's more that we can do across the partnership, but reassuring around some of the activity the roads policing unit does as part of their contribution to that. One of the things that comes up regularly from the public, and probably more so given the intention of the new administration of County Council to put more 20-mile-an-hour zones in across the county is kind of the approach to enforcement of those. And of course, more 20-mile-an-hour zones going in doesn't give policing any more resources to enforce them. We also know that actually a lot of the greatest risk in terms of the killed and seriously injured data is actually on the higher speed single carriageway road joining towns up. How does the constabulary seek to balance its speed enforcement activity between those sort of highest risk locations and the kind of community concern locations? Because there's inevitably a bit of a conflict there.
Yeah, and there is a balance to find. So broadly speaking, you're right, Commissioner, as I alluded to, the death and serious injuries happening on our A roads, not the 20-mile-an-hour zones. So the specialist roads policing resources target their effort on those A roads, those killed and seriously injured hotspots. Our neighbourhood policing teams, our community speed watch partners then come into the 20-mile-an-hour zones. And some of the best practice, well, I think that's the right way to prioritise our resourcing. And around those 20-mile-an-hour zones, the kind of some of the best practice emerging nationally and from the Department for Transport says it's the work in support of those 20-mile-an-hour zones around making sure the street furniture is right, subtle, it's described to me here, subtle pot planting and road marking. So reinforcing through the environment the behaviour you want the driver to have. So that's how we think about it.
Thank you. It's useful to have clarity on. Thank you. And as I said, I think the work the Roads Policing Unit does is really good, and the public should be really reassured by how our roads are looked after within the resources available. I want to go on to hate crime. Reports of hate crime in Hertfordshire have increased over the last 12 months. There's sort of 5 strands of hate crime recognised in law around disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, and transgender identity. How's that increase in hate crime over the last year in Hertfordshire been reflected across those different strands of hate crime?
Thank you. As you say, Commissioner, for the 12 months to the end of October this year, there were 1,935 hate crimes reported. That's up 236, or just short of 14%. The overwhelming majority of those and of that increase are of a racial nature. So 203 of those additional 236 were racial hate crime, 12 religious, 11 disability, 26 sexual orientation, and there was a reduction of 2 transgender-based reported hate crimes. So we have a really good understanding of what is happening. I'm not convinced that actually the level is increasing as much as the awareness of the fact that it is a crime and that people should report hate crimes to us. And of course, we have invested as a constabulary significantly in our reporting centres, what we call third-party reporting centres, where a member of the public can go into, not necessarily a police station, but places around the county. We've got 40 of them, and tell people about their experience, and if that is a hate crime, then get proactively referred to the police. So I think some of that awareness and the availability to report hate crime is what's driving some of the numbers here. It's too many, but I'd rather know about it than not know about it.
Thank you. And during Hate Crime Awareness Week, we visited a disability charity in Watford, and one of the things they were, some of the people there were saying is actually something that's been sadly normalised for some people and don't always recognise that they have been a victim of crime. You talked about the work around third-party reporting centres. Are there other steps that the constabulary is taking or could take to encourage greater reporting so that victims can get the right response?
We have a really proactive approach around, as you've recently said, the Hate Crime Awareness Week, where we use communication campaigns to really draw out how important it is that people do come forward and tell us. We work really closely with businesses and organisations. So, for example, Watford Football Club, we work really closely with them to make sure that young people going through the football club in one way or another People going to watch games at the football club, as in other businesses, are aware of the fact that a hate crime is just that and needs to be proactively dealt with. So we also worked recently with a brilliant company called Electric Umbrella, so who some of the listeners may have seen on television recently, to produce and co-produce a song called "It's Not a Crime to Be Different." Really using the medium of music in a different way to communicate with the public of Hertfordshire, to say if you are being picked on for any reason whatsoever, you should talk to the police, and if that is a crime, we will record it and we will support you as best we possibly can.
Thank you very much for that, and that work with Electric Umbrella has been really good and positive, and has been well received, I think, across the county. What's the positive outcome rate for hate crime in Hertfordshire, in terms of, do offenders get identified and brought to justice, and how is the constabulary seeking to improve outcomes for victims? So
it's not high enough. As I told you, there are 1,935 hate crimes recorded in the 12 months to the 31st of October. 13.2% of those, about 250, were subject of a positive outcome. However, and that's not enough. However, nearly 1,000 of those were recorded at what police call outcome 15 or 16. That means we know we have a named person, but either because the victim didn't want, or the officers decided that evidence wasn't there, we didn't progress that to a charge, a caution, or an out-of-court resolution. I have a very clear view and asked the team that we need to do better in that space, because there's 1,000 of those 1,900 crimes where we had a name, and we should be doing more to hold that person to account, whatever that looks like, and therefore encourage and discourage them from any future behaviour of that nature. So we need to solve more of this.
Thank you. What training is provided to police officers and staff to raise their awareness of what hate crime is and isn't, and to support them to identify offences and provide an effective response to victims?
Every new officer into the constabulary gets an input on hate crime, what it is, how important it is, and how they should deal with it when they join Hertfordshire Constabulary. They also get an input on something called non-hate crime incidents, which we may talk about in a while. But it's important that officers can identify hate and hate crime and know the appropriate response to either. Our staff as well in key places get training as well. So for example, the control room will take a lot of the initial calls, be that on the phone or be that online, get training how to recognise hate crime, correctly categorise it, how to support victims, how to refer to other agencies where that support's there. And we will continue to focus on that training and making sure that the quality of what we do is right.
Thank you. I was going to go on to non-crime hate incidents next. How many have the constabulary recorded over the last 12 months, and are you able to break that into kind of the recording and then what happens after in terms of any further investigation?
Yes, Commissioner. In the 12 months to the end of October, there were 215 non-crime hate incidents. I can break that down in significant detail. 140 of those were of a racial nature, 23 were of a homophobic nature, 10 related to disability, and something like 40 related to religious, 4 transgender, and the others were less clear. So we understand what those non-crime hate incidents look like. It's really important, the constabulary approach to this is, we are here to focus on dealing with crime. But there are occasions when hate happens and harm happens or vulnerability is caused where it falls short of a crime, where we need to do some appropriate action. There are also times when it's not for the police to get involved. So we're doing a lot of work with the organisation, the staff and the officers, to make sure we get that response right. The focus is on crime or dealing with vulnerability, not to wade into free speech or name calling. And I say that in no way to undermine some name calling can be a crime. So there's a difficult balance to find, but we're helping our teams to get that right.
Thank you, and reassuring to hear that. It's an area that does attract a lot of attention. Obviously, came out of the review into the racially motivated murder of Stephen Lawrence many years ago. But increasing sort of national question marks about whether the system is effective. The Chief Inspector of Constabulary has called for the end of police recording of non-crime hate incidents. The Metropolitan Police has recently said it will stop investigating them. How are you responding in terms of the Constabulary's position and how much resources is put into it, given that kind of changing landscape of senior people in policing saying, not sure this is a space we should be in?
I mean, Commissioner, I'm personally watching that with interest. As you say, a number of organisations have made a very clear position. I'm watching that very closely. I have been really clear, and am really clear, that I'm training my officers and staff to distinguish between what's crime and what's offensive language but not a crime. Non-crime hate incidents are only recorded where we believe it's necessary to prevent an escalation of harm or we believe someone is vulnerable. And that's the position we've got at the moment. So I have not said we will not record, but we will only record where we're doing it to prevent harm or to look after someone vulnerable. And just because we recorded it doesn't mean we go knocking on people's door and arresting people. Of course it doesn't. It just gives us an insight as to what's happening.
Thank you. I welcome that. You touched earlier around the kind of interplay into kind of freedom of speech issues. You probably referred to it a bit in terms of what you've already said around the processes you're putting in place on this, but how are you ensuring that those judgments are being made effectively in terms of what is kind of criminal matter for the constabulary and what is a freedom of speech, freedom of expression issue, so that the public can be reassured that that balance is being got right as far as possible?
Supervisors are actively involved in that decision making when it happens. We then dip sample those decisions through an internal hate crime and non-crime hate incident review group. In addition to that, we then take those to an external hate crime scrutiny panel who review and give us feedback on our decisions. Did we get this right? For example, we decided this was not a crime and we shouldn't take any action. Do you think that's right? We recorded this one, but we didn't take action. Do you think that's right? So we've got that real kind of internal and external lens on how we're doing. And I'm really aware, Commissioner. I'm really aware, because we've had incidents this year in Hertfordshire where we have been criticised, and I've been criticised for how we dealt with particular things. So it's important we get this right.
Thank you, and pleased to hear the focus you've got on that, because it's really important that people who are genuinely a victim of a hate crime, which is a crime motivated by those protected characteristics, get the right response, but where people are being a bit mean to each other, perhaps that's dealt with sensibly. Thank you for that. I'm going to go on to our final agenda item, which is missing people. How does the constabulary respond to reports of missing people and assess the various risk levels? Clearly a very worrying time for family members when somebody does go missing, and often will turn to the police for help in locating.
So every time someone is reported missing, one of the first functions we do, be that through the control room or the officer on the ground, we assess the risk of that individual. How old are they? How vulnerable are they? What are the circumstances in which they've gone missing? And we either categorise it as high, medium or low risk. If it's a high risk, broadly speaking, a senior officer will oversee that. We'll mobilise people there and then to go and find them and hopefully keep them safe. And if it's a medium or low risk, obviously the response is proportionately so. It's a fairly significant activity for the constabulary. We typically get about 5 reports of missing people a day. And if it's a high-risk, vulnerable missing person, that can take a lot of resource to do that. But of course, the primary responsibility of the police is to preserve life. So we get that balance right as much as we can.
Thank you. And how does the constabulary work with partner agencies to safeguard repeat missing people, or identify where actually the root cause of someone going repeatedly missing is actually because of exploitation or criminality?
Key area of work for us. So we work really closely with children's homes, with care providers around children's homes, like the County Council, Children's Social Care, national charities in this space, to make sure, because sadly there's a lot of repeat incidents of young children going missing. That will be driven by things like chaotic lifestyle. It can be driven by children being criminally exploited by gangs, or just lack of general supervision and good control of a young person growing up. We work incredibly closely with partners to take a case-by-case basis where an individual is repeatedly missing. We work really closely with the schools. We work really closely with, as I say, councils and others to get this bespoke understanding and intervention and care package wrapped around children and vulnerable people. There's a lot of it. We've got more work to do, but it's a real clear focus for us.
Thank you very much for that update. I'm going to bring the meeting to a close there. Thank you very much, Chief Constable, for those updates. I hope members of the public watching have found the meeting useful, and the next APM will be in December ahead of Christmas. I'll close the meeting there. Thank you. Thank you.